Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. Enter our classroom as we discuss the week's news involving Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, and international football, all from the perspective of a couple Americans. This week featured Arsenal's 24-25 Premier League debut at home against Wolverhampton Wanderers, aka Wolves. How you doing, Keith?
Dove, I've never so much enjoyed putting £60 million down the drain. I don't know.
Havertz scores again.
This is so much more fun than I anticipated. And happy new season for real this time. Obviously, I say for real that we have now a game to talk about.
Yes. It's been feels like forever since the last season ended. So, yeah. Before we get to talking about the match itself, just a little bit of follow-up first. For one thing, I caught myself listening back to last week's episode when I was talking about our origin story and how I'd watched All or Nothing, the Arsenal documentary on Amazon, and then I caught up on the first few matches of the season. I referred to them as the first few episodes of a season, I guess probably conveying the way I think of Arsenal a lot of the time. It's the Arsenal show.
I mean, it's not the craziest way to define all of this.
So yeah, that was one thing I just wanted to set the record straight. Whenever I catch myself, I try to point it out. Next, I thought it'd be fun because it is basically follow up. We made our predictions for the season last episode. One of them was specifically for opening day, so we can hold ourselves to task immediately.
Because this show is about nothing except accountability.
That's what follow up is for. So, as far as the starting lineup, what we both had in common and both got right. Well, first of all, let me say we referred to it as the opening day lineup, right? Which could be interpreted a couple ways. If we interpret it a little bit more liberally to give ourselves a little more credit, we actually got 100% scores. And if we're talking specifically about the starting lineup, then there were a couple players that were off.
Yeah, no, I don't think it counts when you start throwing in the subs. That's
okay.
Especially given some of some of them who came off for others. I think we
okay.
Yeah, the goal was the starting 11, and I mean, we didn't do too badly.
No. So we both got Raya. You got Zinchenko. I had Timber coming on instead of Zinchenko, so that one was off. Although again, Timber did all the ones who we predicted to come on. Did come on, like they didn't come on in the starting 11, but were subbed in later. So Timber, then we both of us guessed Gabriel, Saliba, and White. I am wearing my Saliba jersey today for this season, so I did a little do as I came down the stairs on the way to record. So Odegaard and Rice, we both got. Party, you guessed. I did not. I picked Trossard. So again, Trossard came on as a sub. As far as the forward players, you guessed Jesus, who did not, but then we both got Havertz and Saka, and I added Martinelli, who was a starter. So Trossard, Timber, and Jesus did not come on. So overall, pretty close. So
yeah, not bad. I mean, it does speak a little bit to, in spite of the idea of building the depth of the squad, there are a certain number of players we can sort of talk about as being nailed on starters. And some of it, like the Zinchenko one, I think was more as much a case of Timber still recovering from a pretty serious injury a year ago. So there's a little bit of those that I don't want to say pick themselves, but Jesus was a bit of a stretch, I would admit. As saw in the last episode, I'm quite high on Jesus and what he could do this season. I may yet be proven right on that, but for the meantime, yeah, I think it's to Martinelli's credit that he's, for now at least, has sort of won the starting spot. We'll see how long that holds, or how much it matters as the competitions, we go deeper in the competitions and how things.
Well, what was also interesting this match is, so we saw, as we've gotten used to with the modern Arsenal, lots of corner kicks. Mm-hmm. None of the left side corner kicks were taken by Martinelli. It was Rice. And then when Rice came off, was it Trossard instead of Rice, I think? It was not Martinelli.
I actually don't remember who was taking the late
I think it was Trossard. I think once Rice came off, Trossard took the next one. So
it did sort of feel like Saka's goal, the second goal, spoiler alert, Arsenal won 2-0. It did feel a bit like the second goal kind of just ended the game there. Like it we'll at 1-0 there were some nervy moments, but at 2-0 that felt a lot like it just kind of took the wind out of a lot of the game, and it just became a nice, pleasant afternoon, or I guess sort of late morning from our perspective here. But
from your perspective, I was watching this in the mid to late evening. So, but yeah, so it seems to me like Martinelli has kind of been relieved of corner kick duty. So I don't know what the thinking is there.
Possibly, it is interesting. It did seem like, as I recall, a lot of them were actually. I shouldn't say a lot of them, but some of them were played short to Martinelli, who was on that side.
Okay.
And was able to was to run out, but also a lot of them were being floated in. It's all interesting, we talk about their set pieces, how they were, especially in the first half in particular, it looked like there was an effort to put a lot of Arsenal players on the back post. And so that's sort of where the ball was intended to go. But I sort of was losing track a little bit at points because there were a lot of corners. Some of the things they were running, and again, the tenor of the game really changed. For the last 15 or so minutes after it was 2-0.
Oh yeah, definitely. So, anyways, that's a little bit of a teaser for the proper match. We've got some news to discuss. So, semi-automated offside referee. There's been some news trickling out about this. One thing that I saw that was really interesting, it's always funny to me when I get my Premier League news from Apple Insider and other blogs that I follow for Apple-related news. But I did get this via Apple Insider, and it was interesting. So the reason they were covering this is because the report is that basically the pods of cameras that they're going to have around all the stadiums, and there's going to be a whole lot of these around the stadiums. Stadiums. Apparently it's based around iPhone, and it's going to be iPhone 14 and newer, and they'll have multiple iPhones in each of these little like weather sealed pods, which is like redundant. iPhones are weather resistant anyways, but I guess if it's going to be out there for a long time and all kinds of weather, I guess they just want to be extra safe. But what was also really funny to me reading this article is I noticed as I was reading it, there were things that they were getting wrong in the article about just the basics of the Premier League and things like that. Like they mentioned that the VAR is a fourth official. I was like, no, there is a fourth official. The VAR is the fifth. There's some funny things like that I now can point out that I wouldn't have noticed a few years ago. So,
see, you are learning something.
Well, at least a little bit, but yeah, so I think still no indication of when we're going to see it, but it did sound from what I was reading like it will be timed to coincide with the end of an international break, which does lend credence to what I was saying, that maybe it's just they need to test it out, and like during the international breaks, they'll take the opportunity to test it out in the stadiums where it's been installed or something.
As I recall, what I'm hearing was October, so there is an international break in October, and that makes sense. That would, as it makes sense as a time they would do it. I've expressed my displeasure at playing the season under different rules after it starts, but I think the general sense is as long as everyone's played the same number of matches, as long as everybody's essentially operating under the same system, you play. I'm just going to make a number. You play 5 matches without it, and everyone plays. I guess the remaining 29. No, that's not right. Whatever the remaining number of games is. I don't do math.
You're not a math professor, yeah.
whatever the remaining number of games is, as long as those numbers add up, games without, the offside review and games with it, as long as those are even across everyone, then it's as fair as that's going to be.
Right.
We say that as someone is going to concede a goal score a goal that they shouldn't, and everyone's going to be angry because that's the world we live in.
Well, so that brings me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So the morning of the match, I think as I was lying in bed, the match may have been underway or about to get underway, and I was just looking at the email that Arsenal had sent out, and there was a link to the changes that Premier League has made for this season, and most of them are pretty small, but it was interesting. I guess Wolves voted against the other 19 teams in the league to end VAR altogether.
Yeah, so Wolves was, and there's on the receiving end of apparently had the worst record involving VAR and the decisions that went against them, both overturning things but also upholding things or adding things. Apparently, Wolves had a consistently terrible record. Like by far was the most affected. And apparently, late in the season, I introduced a motion to scrap VAR, and the motion was defeated 19-1. You can guess what the one was.
Well, yeah. Yeah, so that was interesting. So yeah, it's here to stay. But it didn't seem to me like a new declaration is kind of more of a confirmation of what the stance has been, which is that there will be a very high threshold for its use. They're going to reduce delays and really emphasize overturning clear and obvious errors, right? Like we've talked about before. One new thing is a very interesting way to go about this. They are going to be explaining their decisions a little more, apparently via a Twitter account. So there's now an official like PL officials Twitter account or something like that, and they will use that to disseminate a little bit, I guess 140 characters of elaboration on each decision.
I mean, it's interesting because apparently this happens in rugby, and I see this in the NFL is, American football is well known for this, but even baseball is starting to see this with replays, and hockey's doing it too, where the call is made, the referee turns on a microphone and announces what his call is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you have just never got, like, it would not, they tried it. Gosh, was it during the Olympics they tried it? I feel like I've seen them somewhere trying it, and like half the time the microphone doesn't work half the time, but they're working on the kinks on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I think the threshold thing is it's what they call a change of emphasis. So there is a sense, and I've talked about this a little bit. This my theory of the case is that part of the problem with VAR is that you don't get a clear sense from the referee amongst the referees, like what it's for,
right, and
how it's supposed to be used. And hopefully, if you kind of reiterate the standard that it's supposed to uphold, that will hopefully lead to consistency, which I think is the one thing, the thing you can really go for. If your goal is to get every single call exactly right, if your goal is perfection, you'll fail. And you're just going to lead to a lot of confusing situations. The best bet you're going to have is consistency. That is itself a difficult thing to pull off, as we can talk about for this week or this weekend. Not just our game, but across games in the league. So
yeah, I did catch the halftime show during our game, so there was some interesting action going on.
Right. So yeah, and that's going to be something, but also to some level that's kind of always been the case. You hope VAR catches the mistakes, like the obvious ones. And, it's interesting. It's going to be weird. I mean, we talked about this last year with points of emphasis about arguing with the referees about cards and about time wasting. And the general belief is, and it kind of always works that way, it works for the first couple of months. And then by the time you get to November, we're just going to do the thing we always did. So we'll see how this sticks. I'm not super optimistic about that, but
yeah. Yeah, so I guess one other thing that we will probably feel the effect of quite a bit is, I guess, a change in emphasis. I don't know if that applies here, but a tweaking of how they handle additional time. So apparently they're walking back what they had introduced last year, trying to reduce the added time now, kind of going back a little bit. And one specific figure I'm seeing in this Arsenal article is that, for instance, after a goal is scored, they will allow 30 seconds of game time to be eaten up by celebration. Like they won't start clocking the stoppage time until 30 seconds have elapsed. So that's like one example, but they're basically, they don't want 10 minutes of stoppage time unless there's like multiple serious injuries or something like that. Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of always, like we talked about in the old system, stoppage time was kind of, it just seemed to come from nowhere or from somewhere. Like it seemed to be completely divorced from what was actually happening on the field. But then you have that, sort of, we'll call it the World Cup system, because we first saw it in Qatar over that World Cup. And all of a sudden you're seeing like, oh my God, there's like 9, 10, 11 minutes of stoppage time every single half. And that's a lot of extra football.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah. So do you want to get into the super tiny rule changes or move along?
I mean, unless there's something in there that in particular we're curious about. There's a lot of little things, and I suspect it's one of those we won't really think much about it until it affects something that happens in the game, and then say, okay, well, actually, this was the thing they mentioned back in September or back in August. But
right, yeah, I'm not really too curious about it. It's mostly clear, and these are situations that won't really matter. Is like, as an example of one thing that doesn't really matter is like the ball boys now that we talked about, like having to go to the cones or not. Apparently now the ball boys can hand the ball to the keeper for a goal kick. Like that's one thing that they don't have to go to the cone for.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, apparently there's been some news about player movement, right?
Yes. So again, the perils of doing this show when we do it, and we're all about accountability here. So last time I basically said, yeah, Nketiah is going to Marseille. Yeah, that didn't happen. Apparently, then I saw the story the next morning. Apparently, Marseille had bought someone else, another striker, and so that's probably. So yeah, they're not going to spend money on Eddie Nketiah, which has happened sometimes. Apparently, Nottingham Forest is interested in a deal.
Oh, okay. Rejoin with teammate Matt Turner.
Yeah, well, we'll see how long longer Turner's there. That's a different thing. Supposedly, there's some interest from Crystal Palace, but they have not gone as far as Forest have gone, as far as submitting a bid or having those kind of advanced conversations. But so, for Nketiah's sake, you kind of hope he's able to go. He needs game time. I can respect that. Also, in terms of players leaving, apparently Wolves have actually made a proposal for Aaron Ramsdale, which is fascinating on a couple of levels. Arsenal has expressed interest in Dan Bentley, who is the backup keeper at Wolves.
Oh.
No idea if those two things are related, if there's talk of a swap, if there's anything like that.
Now, that's particularly interesting to me because we just saw them play and their keeper seemed competent. I mean, there's definitely one time, like the goal that Kai Havertz scored, that header. Maybe Raya would have gotten there and caught that. Potentially, maybe not. It seems more likely he might have. But overall, he seemed competent.
Yeah, that's the other interesting part of the decision. Is they have a keeper in Jose Sa, who's a pretty good one overall. Yeah. I mean, you could argue maybe Ramsdale's better. I certainly haven't dug into the intricacies of Sa's game. He's generally a better regarded keeper than most. That would be an interesting move from Ramsdale's perspective, going to a club that has an established starter. But who knows?
Could be the Raya of Wolves. Maybe.
Arsenal, by the way, said there's been some targeting of Joan Garcia, who is the keeper at Espanyol, which is in Barcelona, as would be a potential replacement. Bentley would probably be more in the third keeper kind of level. He's not very well regarded, but he was on the bench for Wolves on Saturday. He's their number 2 currently. But yes, it is interesting how those conversations take place. I mean, it's just out of necessity. That's how the schedule is drawn up, but by two teams that were playing each other.
It made it convenient. They were in the same building to talk about it.
Apparently the offer came on Monday, so it was after the fact. And then, so this is not necessarily transfers it directly, but Mikel Merino was not on the lineup at all for Real Sociedad on the weekend. Did not start, was not on the bench. That sort of thing, especially for a player of his quality, is usually the precursor to him not being on the team anymore.
Right.
Obviously, the hope is there. It's not clear, and I've heard this from some different people, who actually report on this, as opposed to just idle speculation. It isn't necessarily the case that it's one in, one out, that like Arsenal have to sell Nketiah or someone before they bring in Merino, but I think they would like to do that for financial reasons, not in the sense of having the money, but in terms of how it works out on the balance sheet for the club. So Merino remains, I think Merino does remain a target. It'll be interesting to see if they go any other directions. I admit I haven't heard anything potentially serious necessarily. Some other clubs have made other moves for other players, but nothing that looks like, at the moment, nothing for Arsenal. But we've got, I'm looking at the calendar, 2 weeks left before the end of the window. So the window closes, so it would be interesting to see where Arsenal goal goes, how long it takes them to finalize this Merino deal, if it is going to happen. So
right.
Welcome to transfers.
Yeah. And before we move along, there's one brief thing in news that we did not cover a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the summer international tournaments. Apparently, Messi was injured during the final of Copa America, so he's been on the DL since then. He has not played in the League's Cup, and Miami got eliminated. So for anyone who's following along with that, it's a little update there.
Yes, the League's Cup goes on. They've reached the semifinals, which are record on Monday. I think they're on Wednesday of this week, and then the final will be on Saturday. And everyone else in MLS, because it's all 4 MLS teams in the final 4. The last of the Club America and who was Colorado upset Club America, and I think it was Mazatlan who Philadelphia beat. So the Mexican clubs got knocked out in the court. The last of the Mexican clubs got knocked out. So,
go USA!
Yeah. Not bad. Not bad.
All right. Well, before we move on to the match proper, let me take this opportunity to tell all of our viewers and listeners about a tool that we care about a lot called Zencastr. We use it for every episode because it is so easy. You just log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. You record studio-quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. Feel a sense of zen knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. It's an all-in-one solution, so if you thought about podcasting before and gave up thinking you needed a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your all-in-one you can create your podcast all in one place. And of course, it could be an all-in-one podcast if you want it to be, and distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. Have you worried about what you sound like with what I just did? Zencastr's post-production process makes you sound smooth like a stick of butter. It automatically removes those ums and ahs in your recording, and it removes those awkward pauses in conversation too. Set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise, all with a click of a button. So if that sounds good to you, head over to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Gooner, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience as we do for all our podcasting and content needs. It's time for you to share your story. So, 2 to the Arsenal. Is that an appropriate morphing of the
2-0? I mean, Wolves did play in the game. 2-0 to the Arsenal.
2-0. Okay, I missed the word. All right.
Yeah.
On a somber note, did you know much about Kevin Campbell, who they were memorializing at the beginning of the match?
Not directly. So Campbell played, I had to look most of this up, but Campbell played for Arsenal in the late 80s and the early 90s until 1995. So I had, it's interesting, when things happen over the summer and how they get brought to your attention at the start of the season. We watched them having a moment, and you notice the team wearing the black armbands, and I admit, I saw a picture up there, but I couldn't. I was like, who is this for? And as some, you hear on the broadcast, and some, people reminded me it was Kevin Campbell, which I did remember because he passed away in June of this year. So this was obviously the first chance to do that. Arsenal do something, and he played for a number of years at Everton as well. So certainly, I assume Everton will, I don't remember if Everton was home for the opener, but we either this past weekend, or I guess if it's their home openers this weekend, they'll have something for him. Played a number of years at Arsenal. A prolific goal scorer. Apparently, as in the academy, scored 59 goals in one season, which is pretty good. Yeah, he was with Arsenal for a number of years. He made his first appearance in the 87-88 season. Played with them through 94-95, during which he won the first division title in 1991, won an FA Cup, a League Cup, the Charity Shield, the old Community Shield, and then also in 1994 was a member of Arsenal's last European title, the European Cup Winners' Cup, which they won that year. Also won the first division with Nottingham Forest, and then was played for a number of years with Everton. Scored 59 total goals for the club in the course of his playing career, which is a mark in terms of the club rankings was equaled this weekend by Bukayo Saka.
Wow, that's
and that was an interesting comment. It popped up in the post game. That Campbell had 59 goals and Saka scored his 59th today, and what he means to the club. He did some television work over the last few years. So he's certainly a known figure to a newer generation of Arsenal fans, at least those who watch their broadcast, British television broadcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Died rather suddenly in Manchester. Apparently, there is some investigations over some of the treatment he received, and there are some questions being asked. But sort of very sad. Certainly a loved player during his time with Arsenal, and then apparently with Everton too as well. So it's obviously sad and worthy of commemoration.
Right.
It's always interesting when you start the season that sort of way, but it's worth remembering the players who are who are the club's past as well as their present.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, what a game! I mean, at a high level, we won. We took a victory away. It did feel at times like we maybe had to fight for it a little bit more than I would have liked to see. But it's the beginning of the season, it's.
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying in baseball, that you're never as good or as bad as you look on opening day. The idea, yeah, especially with baseball, they play every single day, so it's you can't overreact to one game when there's 100 something of them. In the course of a Premier League season, you're down to the 38 games. Now I'm on the math part. In the course of the Premier League season, you're down to fewer games, and so as a result, they can stand out a little more. But still, you don't want to get carried away, especially given how many of our key players missed a lot of preseason or spent a lot of time, recovering from knocks or just recovering from the summer tournaments.
Right.
And so, there were some moments, and some of that's just the newness of the season. Yeah, they haven't played a competitive game in 3 months.
Right.
Which is, it takes a little bit of the edge off. And there were moments where they looked like last year's Arsenal. It's picked up right where they left off. We're moving the ball. We're generating chances, generating lots of corners, as we saw, scoring goals. And then there were moments, especially, the first part of the second half, where, they looked a little ragged. And there were some players there were different players to be critical of. Some of them, I mean, I think it's fair to be a little critical of William Saliba had a few errors in the game. I thought Declan Rice had a shaky game at points. And, those guys played deep into the European Championships. Rice played like just about every minute for England. He played a lot. And that's, it's going to take them a little while to sort of get their legs under them, I think, to sort of get them back into what they do for Arsenal, sort of get themselves mentally back with that. And then there were some other players who don't necessarily have the same excuse. I'm thinking of Thomas Partey, who we can address. I don't know. Do you want to talk about Partey now, or I don't know. What did Partey stand out to you at all in the game, or since he's not a guy we've sort of talked about as much?
Yeah, he didn't really stand out to me much one way or another. What about you?
Well, I mean, there was some concern from my end, and I know from others. Obviously, he was injured. He's a little bit older at this point. He's in the final year of his contract. He was not particularly good in the latter stages of last season. Like, I think it's fair to say he was kind of poor in the latter stages, and some of that could have been recovery from injury. Right, he's not 100% back, but he didn't play any. There were no summer tournaments for Ghana. They may have had some World Cup qualifiers, but maybe that's probably 2 games, like not really much of anything. He had a normal preseason, and I thought he was okay in the first half, and he started to, I thought, kind of ran out of gas in the second half. We started to see the not running the same way. His passes weren't as crisp or as on target as they usually are, and how much of that is fatigue? Maybe he's not a 90-minute player anymore. How much of that is he needs to be adjusting his game with age. Now, I'm not making the comparison directly to Messi, obviously, but one of the things that people sort of seen that the Leo Messi who broke onto the scene of Barcelona 20 years ago, or the one who was at his peak, 10, 15 years ago, sort of in the late aughts, early 2010s, is not the player he is now because he's lost some of his speed and all that. So he plays a very different kind of game.
Right.
I wonder if Partey's going to have to, it has been and will continue to make those kinds of adjustments to account for the fact that he can't play the game the way he used to. But then again, he played 90 minutes. Maybe Arteta thinks he can be built up again to go that distance. And perhaps, I mean, we don't really know what his health is and where he stands coming back from injury. So perhaps that's what's going on. But it'll be interesting to see as we go forward how much more he continues to play.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's see what else is there to talk about with this match. I mean, the header from Havertz, that was really nice. So Saka had involvement on both goals that were scored.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was a little bit of both because Havertz had the assist on Saka's as well.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
I mean, I guess you'd say, yeah, we dwelled on the negative a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the positive. Odegaard was Martin Odegaard, and Saka and Havertz picked up right where they left off. They I would threw in the 60 million pounds joke there at the beginning. I mean, the Kai Havertz. We'll talk more about Kai Havertz a little bit more. We'll talk more about him sort of after we finish up with the game. But yeah, he had a nice game. Was his usual sort of dangerous self, popping up in different areas. Also, was his usual off the ball, somewhat dangerous self, which we can talk about in the next little bit. Also, and Saka. I mean, I think the most interesting thing about the game for Saka was that he actually was substituted off, which is not something you see. Got a little, because of where he was on the field, got a little impromptu lap of honor, half lap of honor, because he had to come off on the far. By rule, you have to leave on the closest sideline, so he went off on the far sideline and got to walk all the way around the end.
Gotcha. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, so that where he received some well-deserved applause as he went around.
Yeah.
He's very good. I
don't know say.
I don't know if we talk about this enough. He's really good. And I thought he had a great game. But yeah, it was interesting to see him pulled off. Because I mean, Arteta, especially last year, was a system like he played all the time. Maybe he's just getting back after the run through the Euros with England. But it was nice to see all of that, him playing well, but also him being able to come off that way.
Well, yeah, and it could be, and this is something I think that the commentators had made mention of, where we could be seeing part of how Arteta is utilizing the depth of our bench is maybe you don't play your best players the whole 90 minutes when you don't need to. You try to get them off sooner, give them a rest, not push them as far. Maybe it could be something like that too, right?
Yeah, and I'd say the one defense of Arteta is there were a handful of games, especially in the first half of the season, especially in the Champions League, where things were decided kind of late. And, you also don't want to be in a case, and you'll hear this in other sports, you don't want to get in a case where your starters only get comfortable playing 60, 70 minutes, and then you get to a game like, Liverpool or City, or even Villa this weekend. Yeah. You have to play 90 minutes, and they just have it. Now, again, it's hard. There's a level where it's hard to read too much into the first game because we have no other data to go off this season. Well, I guess obviously Arteta wants to, obviously Partey and Rice will be terrible and Saliba's a mess and Saka will carry us as far as he can go and then be substituted off every game at 80 minutes. Obviously that has happened 100% of the time this season. So that's obviously will never change.
Yeah. But is it past performance is not a guarantee of future results or something like that?
I usually go with objects in the mirror, or closer than they appear.
So, what was your take on the officiating for this match?
So, I have to say, the general line from Arsenal fans after the game was pretty negative toward the referee, and I don't 100% share that. I mean, there's my most controversial take of the season, probably. Like, I don't think the referee was that bad. Now, there were a handful of moments I think they're certainly bothersome for their inconsistency. I think some of them are going to get us caught with the conversation we had earlier about VAR and how it's used in the standard for jumping in. I mean, there are a few moments. There's always a few moments, but I did not come away like terribly bothered by the official's performance. I can think of some moments to nitpick, certainly, and I'm sure we'll talk about them, but I didn't come away thinking he did a particularly poor job. I'll also sort of throw in that this is the new season resolution. I'm trying not to be as critical of the officials. But overall, and we can talk about some of the incidents, the cards not given. I can think of a couple. I mean, they're the two big ones that I know are sort of dominating post-game conversation. There was one that we got a little close. There was a sequence where Partey was fouled like 3 times in quick succession in the midfield, and that was like, okay, that's rotational foul. That's like an obvious rotational foul. You probably should have pulled a card from that, but he didn't. And okay, that's how it's going to go. But the two big ones.
Yeah, the counterpoints that I was about to present to you.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. I don't disagree about them, but we'll talk about them. Let's start. Let's do chronological order. Let's start with old friend Kai Havertz.
Yeah. So if I'm remembering the sequence correctly, I think Havertz may have shoved somebody or something. Like, I think if I'm remembering right, he may have initiated the situation, but the other player ended up knocking him down. And then as he fell down, he pulled the other guy down, but the guy landed on him. And as he was pushing himself back up, pressed his hand and pushed himself into an upright posture using Kai Havertz's throat for support. That is the kind of thing that the on-field official may not have been able to see that. Like, I fully believe that he didn't see the detail of what happened there, but that does look to me like something the VAR should have had something to say about.
Right. And so my defense of the referee and my understanding of, or my trying to sort of work through mentally what was possibly going on there. Yes, they're grappling. Havertz, I think, clearly gets the better of him. But, we talk about Benjamin White, we talk about Jorginho, the wind-up merchants, right? They do all the dark arts and all of that. Kai Havertz does a lot of that. Mm-hmm. He's not the same kind of like stir the pot kind of player. At least he doesn't come off that way, but he's 100% that kind of player. Which isn't a bad thing necessarily to have on the team. But yeah, he's definitely getting involved with that. And as they're going to ground, and you watch it it happened as it was happening. That's kind of what I saw too. It looked like the Wolves player, who's I cannot for the life of me remember who it was bracing himself, and it's easy to sort of say, "Oh, he's choking Kai Havertz." I mean, in the moments, yeah, maybe kind of, but then you watch the replay. He clearly looks at where Havertz is and puts it. That is deliberate. Like, that's clear and obvious and deliberate to me. Now, my guess is the referee in real time didn't see it that way. It looked like a player was trying to prop himself up. And you want to be very careful in that instance about what the kind of call you make and the cards you issue. Having said that, but I won't put that necessarily on the referee, because I do think that should be the VAR to really call down and say, hey, this is the kind of thing we got to be looking at. And I think I wonder if maybe we were getting a bit caught up in that the bar is so high for the VAR to jump in on. And I wonder if that maybe got caught there. That's kind of again, I say defense. Again, if the referee doesn't think he saw it, okay, then I can't really, I can be critical of him for not seeing it. But that to me is sort of on the VAR to act in support and be able to say, hey, this happened. We need to make a change to the call here.
Yeah, it's different than when something like that transpires right in front of the on-field ref. He saw it, he decided no call. Then you have a much tougher case pleading with VAR to change it,
Right, and I'd have to go back and see. I'm curious, like, where the referee is and what his angle on the play might have been. And I haven't had a chance to look through highlights. And, most highlight shows aren't going to show that one.
Right.
Because they show the goals and the saves and that sort of thing. But yeah, I where that one to me, as we talked about sort of the consistency of the officiating, where that's going to get a lot more criticism that I do think is very well deserved, is earlier in the day, and I didn't actually see the incident, but they were talking about it in Newcastle, got a red card for a hand to the throat. You can go back a couple of years, and Granit Xhaka was red carded for a hand to the throat. There is a lot of precedent for that being a red card, and that's again, the VAR cannot jump in and institute a yellow. If the VAR looks and goes, "Nah, that's a yellow at worst," okay, we have to move on with our lives. But you can look at that and justify a red, and that to me is not on the referee, that's on VAR to jump in and say, hey. So when I say the officiating wasn't terrible, I'm sort of more focusing on the central referee.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, maybe there's a recording of it. There is a recording somewhere of him talking to the VAR and if there were conversations, how those took place. But I'm not going to put that necessarily on the referee.
Right.
The way I'm going to. That's not the referee is not the one I think should be necessarily should be blamed by that, which I guess brings us to probably the second incident.
One quick thing. So first of all, let me just say I agree with everything you're saying. When I talk about the officiating, I am looking at it holistically in this case for this match. But one interesting thing, you mentioned the dark arts. And I confirmed my hunch looking up the stats for last season. Kai Havertz had more yellow cards than any other Arsenal player, with Benjamin White in number 2.
Yeah.
So
that sounds right.
So 11 for Havertz, 8 for White. Mm-hmm. So, and then next was 6 and on down. So that was that was about what I thought.
Yeah.
But so the next arguable red card was there's this play involving Jesus where Jesus was potentially fouled or something, but there was no call, right? So then he gets up, he's bent over at the waist, adjusting his sock or something, right? And this player who had been involved in this potential non-call foul earlier grabs him by the posterior and uses his hindquarters to try and tip him over in an aggressive way, like that there is no place for in this game. And again, like that one, I have a harder time because it was from an upright posture. I have a harder time believing that the official that the on-field official, the central referee, did not see that at all.
So he grabs his bum. And if we use the Britishism there. So I'm gonna fall back on this is something you see a lot, especially in hockey, where because we have so many cameras, the referee never seems to see the initial incident. Right. They always see the retaliation.
Right.
And Jesus very clearly shoves him. And I understand that. If guy, decides he wants a piece, he's gonna, okay, that's probably how I'd react too.
Right.
But the referee doesn't see the original foul; he sees the retaliation, and that's I think why Jesus got the yellow. Again, it's because of the way the game played out, we can kind of chuckle about it. He touched his bum. We can kind of chuckle about it a little bit, but it definitely hurts the sense of fairness, but my suspicion is the referee did not see the original play. And we, of course, saw it because the cameras are focused on that action. I don't know where the referee is or what he's even looking at, but if all it is, he turns around and he sees Jesus shoving a guy, pull out, that's a card. Right. That's a card. I understand that. And I suspect that's what's going on there. And I don't know that you can look at that and say red card. And if there's no red card, there's no VAR. So I understand why they're frustrating. But I guess part of it is I'm just trying to mellow out about the referees and not get super worked up about it.
Well, and then meanwhile, I'm coming at this from the opposite point of view. In prior seasons, I'm mostly deferential to the referees. Like, well, whatever. They're doing the best they can. And I've had that point of view. This first match and probably the next several matches that I watch, I've been watching with someone who's been watching sports since before I was born, my father. And he's very opinionated about whatever's going on the field and the officiating. And he's pulling me in that direction of criticizing the referee more than I maybe have in the past.
And it is always very easy in the course of the game to get worked up about the officials because it's happening right in front of you. Sometimes it feels that kind of reaction's there. I mean, I was thinking about it when we talked about, because I always say we really don't want to talk about officials, and then we always talk about the referees. But I feel like if we were to go back, two of the more controversial games of last season, away to Newcastle and home to Bayern, I actually didn't get to see those. I only saw, I knew about the controversies and I saw the calls afterwards. And it was, I'm going to say it was easy. It was easier for me to rationalize what was going on,
right?
Knowing that the game was over and that's how it played out. Now, had I watched those when they were happening, I'm sure my reaction would have been very different. But I have to say,
it's not filtered through your emotions as much.
Exactly. Right. And so again, I'm aside from a conscious effort to not blame, and it's hard to blame the referees. We won 2-0. Like I can't really, it'd be one thing if one of those guys ended up scoring the goal and we drew 1-1. That would have been. That changes the stakes a little bit, but I again, to me, it's the one that bothers me is retroactively the inconsistency of what happened with the hand on the throat. That's the one, because we have seen that given as a red plenty of times, and I'm not even and I'm not going to disagree with that. Like it is the definition of violent there's no non-violent way to grab someone by the neck,
Well, there's the obvious like joking or something, but right in this context,
which is not going to happen on the field. If that's,
right,
that's
not between players on two opposite teams.
Not as they say, between the lines. So I'm not as worked up about the officiating. I understand people who are, though, but that's my perspective. And I think you're right. The holistic view. I think there's something, but to me, I'm looking more at the central referee himself, and that I could nitpick some stuff. Although I did enjoy the diving call and then the yellow card to the Wolves manager for complaining about it. It was an obvious dive, and deserved to be laughed at. So
yeah, that's almost embarrassing for the manager to get a yellow card like on the opening day match.
Well, what it is he said something that he shouldn't have. I saw the card brandished. I figured it was He Chan. I thought I thought it was for him. Which in that case, because he kind of. I mean, like a lot of players, he doesn't get the call he wants, so there's the... but like, you're not going to get punished for that. Supposedly you get punished for the card gesture, but we never see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, let
me ask you one thing about
because he said the magic word.
G's. Yeah.
So obviously Gary O'Neill said something he wasn't supposed to, and that's why he got a yellow.
So let me ask you one last thing about the Jesus situation. So how are the refs supposed to treat retaliation? So let's say that this happened in full view of the on-field ref. So we're not talking about we're taking VAR out of the equation. The on-field ref sees the bum grab, sees Jesus shove him afterwards, and let's amp it up. Let's say he even goes so far as to punch the guy across the face, but in clear retaliation for something that the ref would have called a foul anyways. Do both players get carded in that situation, or is it the one who initiates if it's seen?
So a lot of that is going to be context dependent. The referee has a lot of discretion. Now, what we saw, I think, was deserving of yellows both ways. Like, you can't haul a guy off the ball like that. Certainly not the way it was done. Jesus isn't standing in the way of a free kick or anything like that. Like, it's not because you do see some situations where guys are taking their time tying their shoes. Oh, I just happen to be standing right over the ball that you're trying to kick. I don't think that's what was happening there. So I think it was an overreaction. I think it deserved a yellow. I think Jesus's reaction deserved a yellow. Now, you mentioned if he tried to punch him, oh yeah, no, that's a red. You get out. You can't do that.
Okay.
In that sense, the retaliation is still wrong, right? You aren't entitled to take a swing at somebody just because they fouled you in the first place. That's the referee's job to maintain order. So that
just making sure.
I mean, now again, the referee can also, and a lot of it can be like game state. So if it's early in the game, the referee may just sort of pull them over and no, we're done. I'm not going to card you now because it's the 10th minute. But we're not going to do this anymore. Like, we're going to put it, and a lot of that just goes down to how they choose to handle those situations. There isn't necessarily a hard and fast rule about the referee has a wide amount of discretion in those instances.
Right. Okay. So let's enter a new segment of the show that we're tentatively calling, and please comment if you have better names, Formation Station. So I've noticed as we're talking, especially in particular last episode, about who our starting 11 would be for this match, and my ideas of who plays where and who is labeled as what position in the formation, whether it's defender, midfielder, or forward, it's a little nebulous sometimes, and I think it'll be helpful to me and hopefully you guys. It'll be helpful to kind of focus on maybe one player each match. Where do they ostensibly play? Where do they actually end up? And how does that affect the game? Like, what are they able to do, and why do they maybe move in different areas? So I think one person who we agreed would be interesting to talk about this match was the leadoff goal scorer, I should say, Kai Havertz. So talk to me about his formation.
So Kai Havertz is listed on the lineup as a midfielder, listed on the roster as a midfielder, and that's typically a lot of ways how he's been thought of. But in the back half of last season, he began to play in the forward line, typically in the central forward position, occupying. And Arteta's used the term, and you come across this a lot in the sport, what they call the false nine. If we think about the number 9 as being the central striker, the central forward who scores goals, the idea of the false 9 is someone who occupies that position but doesn't do that, isn't there to be the focal point of the offense and the ball comes to him and he scores goals. He's there in some ways to draw attention, sometimes to pull defenders away. So you'll see the striker drop deeper into the midfield to pull defenders with him. Other times he's there to hold the ball up and then lay it off to the wingers cutting in. So we'll do a lot of different things from that place, but he's not acting in the role of a striker. Now, we say that Kai Havertz pumped in a bunch of goals in the back half of the season. So his moving into that position, he is in some ways occupying the role of the central forward in what we would call, again, that sort of that false 9 role. That's different than how we talked about him when he came in. Really was a conversation as an idea of him as a replacement for Granit Xhaka and using him as what we might call the left-sided 8. So we think of Odegaard as a number 8, a forward attacking midfielder, especially on the right side, and how he works that triangle with Benjamin White and Bukayo Saka. The idea perhaps was Zinchenko, Havertz, and Martinelli will hook up in that kind of triangle on the left side and be able to push the ball forward that way with Declan Rice as the deep-lying midfielder. We also saw as the season was going on in the early part, Havertz moving forward, and that clearly Arteta was not seeing him as a left-sided 8; he was seeing him as a forward player, and so he was making a lot of runs forward. And I recall us having that conversation. Right? Is Kai Havertz playing well? And my contention was, and I'm going to gloat because I'm pretty sure because I was right about this. The fact, we talked about how it doesn't seem like he's playing well, but he keeps getting in position or receiving the ball. It's like, yes, he keeps getting in those positions. That reflects well on how he's playing. That says he's playing well. And if he keeps doing that, the goals will come. And so they have. And, it does help he's tall. And I think some of it, too, is just confidence. He was really kind of on the outs at Chelsea towards the end of his time there. He wasn't playing with a lot of confidence. He comes to Arsenal, takes some time to integrate with a new team, integrate with a new system, figure out what the manager wants you to do. And I think that's where we were getting, is that he was getting to that point. And we saw in the second half of the season what a confident Kai Havertz looks like. And he was banging in goals for Arsenal. He's banging in goals for Germany, too, for his national team. He's here now again, Arsenal. He's now the team's co-leading scorer, which, because it happened opening day, was exactly how it will go. He's scoring 38 goals and 38 assists in the league this year, as is Saka. Joint leading scorers, Golden Boot. I don't know. I don't know that he's going to be there at the end of the season, but yeah. So just because he's necessarily listed as a midfielder, if you look at the way he plays, he really ends up playing more in that central forward position. And I'll be curious as we continue, if we get to a point where Arteta rotates, doesn't necessarily have a set starting 11, are there perhaps games? Because I think Havertz is a guy he wants to play most games. I wonder if there are games where perhaps Havertz drops into the midfield and is playing deeper while someone else, Jesus is a name that's been mentioned. We threw out Saka as a speculative point. Maybe they play that central forward position. Martinelli has played there as well. Maybe they play the central forward position. And Havertz, sort of like we saw a little bit, maybe like we saw with Xhaka towards the end of his time with Arsenal, or even we see occasion with Odegaard making forward runs and putting himself in position from the midfield as opposed to from that position. So that's kind of how that's where I see Havertz, throwing a lot of names here, I'm forgetting who's who. That's where I see Havertz, the role Havertz is occupying at this point.
Okay, and then when they're showing the formation diagram at the beginning of the match, he is listed as a midfielder. He's in like the midfield row of 3. Like, where do they actually show him there?
They'll show him up in the forward line, because typically he's listed as the center forward. In this case, flanked by Martinelli and Saka. Yeah. The midfield, you'll see Partey listed as ESPN's lineup has it up, which is pretty much, I think, what a lot of them had. Partey, Rice, and Odegaard are listed as the midfielders. Partey in the central as the defensive midfielder. And we know Rice. Odegaard owns the right hand side, And so Rice is going to be on the left-hand side. He definitely plays more there, but he's, will also retreat further back as a defensive player, as a defensive midfielder as well.
All right. So who is your player of the match?
My man of the match is, we've called him the star boy. He's really just the star. It's Bukayo Saka. He was fantastic. He was a terror all game to them. Excellent assist. Yes, Havertz gets credit for the assist. That goal, that goal he scored, that is a confidence goal. Like that is, to go short side on the keeper and just say, you can't stop this. And he couldn't. And you saw the celebration. He wasn't immediately mobbed by his teammates. He got there by himself and just... I'm just that good. And he's just that good.
Really. Haven't seen that celebration before.
He's an incredible player. I thought he was the best player. To me, he's the clear choice. Havertz is a good number 2. Again, goal and assist, played well. For me, it's got to be Saka.
Yeah, it definitely agree with everything you said about Saka. I think Havertz easily could slot in there too. But for me, I want to pick someone who we haven't really talked about yet, except maybe in passing for this match, but who I think made a huge contribution throughout. So, we talk a lot of times about these matches that, we win 1-0, 2-0, where it could have easily gone another way. And sometimes that means a ball dings off the post or the crossbar or just goes a little bit wide because of a deflection or something. I think most of those close calls this game were stopped by David Raya. I think he had a great game. He had a couple really, really tough reflexive saves where he just contorted against his momentum in the one case to bend backwards and stop a hard hit ball. And just a few really key saves that I think caught my attention. And it's not just because of his new brightly colored, flashy jersey they have him wearing this season. But I wanted to call attention to him and have him be my pick this week.
So the Wolves player there, Jorgen Strand Larsen, that may be the save of the season. That is a terrific save with the one-handed, and I know you played a little bit of keeper. We sort of see it as, you just stick your hand out and the ball goes off there. If there's any power on that, it's very easy to get your hand bent back.
And so especially reaching behind you to do it. Yeah.
So the strength there, and the reflex, that is a terrific, outstanding save. I would push back on Raya's selection only because I thought he was involved in some curious miscommunications, especially with Saliba and others, that led to a few giveaways. Again, he was his usual great self in the box, in terms of dealing with crosses and things like that. His distribution was largely solid, but he had a few times that I was like, he can do better.
Right. I noticed that. Yep.
Certainly, if nothing else, we need to make mention of that save because that we may look back in May and say that was the save of the season.
Yeah.
In the first half of the first game.
Yeah, I noticed the distribution being off once or twice. I think the one with Saliba, the giveaway there, I didn't note Raya's involvement in that, so I'll have to rewatch that and pay attention to that. But
I don't know if it was that one in particular, but there were a couple instances where it felt like they Wolves wound up with the ball in some dangerous areas, and not necessarily that was Raya's fault, but he was definitely involved in them getting it, and that's that's not good.
Right.
But again, we have high standards for this club. We have high standards for the squad.
Oh, definitely.
And again, Raya spent all summer with Spain. He didn't play, but he still, was gone there. He had some time off in the preseason, so he's still sort of getting himself back in.
Yeah.
So I think that,
All right. Any closing thoughts on the match?
3 from 3. That's, it's, you don't have to be perfect to take down City, but you also can't think about it in the way of, we have to go 38-0. You really have to sort of approach it from the mindset of, we have a game in front of us, we have to win this game, win today's game, and then the manager and obviously Arteta has to think long term and who needs rest and rotation. But we won the game. It was a solid against a decent, dangerous, but even if they aren't very good opponents, we don't really know yet quite what Wolves are going to be this year. But the difficulty level ramps up a little bit next week. So
yeah, we kept the Wolves at bay. All right. So one question that I wanted to ask you, because at first I thought I noticed it, and then as I thought about it a little more, I was like, yeah. So Zinchenko was wearing number 17 this match, and I thought that looked wrong. And then as I thought about it more, I was like, yeah, wasn't he 35? So can you confirm, was that the case? And why would he change between those two numbers? And I could see this going a couple ways. So I know if you get a number 1 to 11, I know the meaning of that. And those numbers are also sometimes what's causing me difficulty with formations. I think of a player as always playing where that number would indicate, even when they don't. But if you're moving from 35 to 17, is it just lower numbers generally carry more prestige, or is it maybe something else?
So yeah, Zinchenko was 35 last year, and he switched to 17. 17 was worn last season by Cedric Suarez. And I say worn loosely because he didn't really play ever, but I suspect it could have just been just maybe a number he preferred, but Cedric for whatever reason didn't want to give it up, and so it could just be a number he wanted. I don't know what he wore when he was with City, but it could just be he wanted that. Really, the only thing it sort of suggested, because we have thrown Zinchenko's name out over the summer as, is he a guy who's a transfer target for someone else? Maybe he's one of the outgoing players. And the general observation was, well, once it was announced that he was changing his number, he's staying. I mean, you wouldn't have bothered at that point. He was clearly staying at that point. So, to me, that was the only thing. There wasn't anything about it that I sort of said to myself, oh, he's 17 now. That's interesting. I don't think there's anything.
Okay.
I didn't catch a reason why he necessarily did it. So there wasn't anything about it that made me go, huh. But yeah. I think it may just be the lower number, or it may just be, maybe it's a number he likes better. I don't know.
Well, and another curious jersey number related question. So a number change that didn't happen is Raya still has number 22. It seems all but certain that Ramsdale will be leaving the club before the transfer window is open. Is it up to him whether he keeps the number 1 or not, and he just doesn't want to give it up until he's out of the club? And is Raya stuck with 22 for the rest of the season?
In terms of the number, yes, he'll wear 22 this season because that's his number. I don't necessarily know how numbers are handled among the club. I mean, in American professional sports, there's guys get superstitious about numbers, and like you'll hear stories about guys like buying numbers off of each other, trading it for things, or especially you hear. I've heard it a lot. The ones that come to mind are like skill position players in the NFL, quarterbacks, receivers, where single-digit numbers, but sometimes those numbers are taken by kickers. And there's a case of like a kicker has basically traded his number and to some rookie wide receiver who, of course, just got a huge contract and a signing bonus. And the payment is, well, you're going to cover when I redo my kitchen, like you're gonna, it's depending on the players, there'll be cars, donations to charities. Like there's all sorts of things they do, but all that's handled internally. I don't know necessarily how the hierarchy works inside the club at a club like Arsenal. If they sort of like if a player has a number, they rarely will give it up. That's not necessarily normal. The question is it because it's their number? The question is, does it become available? And if it's available, who gets it? And I don't know how those decisions are made within Arsenal. It was a big story a couple of years ago. Emil Smith-Rowe signed his contract extension. He got the number 10.
Right.
But then he got hurt and he never really got his way back into the lineup. And I believe Arsenal currently does not have a number 10.
Right.
Maybe Mikel Merino. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah. And now Smith-Rowe plays for Fulham. So.
Right. It's certainly available. All right. So before we talk about next week, did you want to cover, do we have time for dessert? We're running a little long.
I think we're going a little long. So.
Okay. So what's coming up for next week?
Next week. You mentioned it a minute ago. Away to Aston Villa. This is, that Aston Villa took 2 wins off us last year. This was the loss that, I wouldn't say it cost us the Premier League, but it was the only game we lost in the stretch run of the season last year. This is going to be a big one, of course. Old friend Emi Martinez in goal. Old friend Unai Emery on the sidelines. We've talked a lot over the last couple of years how Arteta has sort of exercised demons, like winning at Everton, winning at Palace, getting points off Liverpool and City, sort of getting the results that we used to not get. I would like to see this be another one that we get. Again, we have a game in front of us, play the game, win the game in front of you. I think there's no reason we can't beat Villa, and so I would very much like to see us beat Villa. That'll be on Saturday, away game in the US. It'll be on the USA Network, and I can't speak to any other part of the world. So.
Yeah, so actually, it's funny you mentioned Emi Martinez. He's another one who doesn't wear number 1 as the starting keeper. So that's at least for the national team. And I think I may have seen a headline that he's finally secured that number 23, I think, for Villa or something, where he had been the number 1 and now he's not going to be, or something like that. But it's for sentimental reasons, I guess. But
players are weird, man. Players are weird.
All right, well, thanks for joining us at Goonryu. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with a link in the show notes. We actually just joined Amazon Music Podcasts in the last couple of weeks, so if that's your platform of choice, give it a shot. Your homework for today is to like a video, either this one or a short. Thanks again to our sponsor, Zencastr. You can check out our description for links to everything we talk about, including our sponsor, as well as our Instagram, Twitter, and other social pages. Again, my name is Dove. You can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
Come on, you Gunners.